In this lesson in National 5 Biology for Scotland, I will introduce the main ultrastructural components of the cell and their functions. When you've watched this video, you should read the relevant part of your textbook and then construct a table with 3 columns in it. One column for the structure, one column for its function, and a final column to list the types of cells in which you find that structure. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments below. And of course, if you like the video, give it a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you subscribe to hear about them in the future. Let's get learning. As far as we know, Earth is the only place in the entire universe where life exists. This unit introduces us to the basic unit of life, the cell, and introduces some of the ways it works. Some scientists say that life is based on cells, which are capable of making new copies of themselves. Others would argue that life should also include non-cellular organic structures such as viruses. Here we are only concerned with cells, but as anyone who experienced the COVID epidemic will know, viruses cannot be ignored. Remember at all times when you study biology, every living thing is trying to survive, at least at the species level. The competition to survive explains everything about living things. The living things in our world can be grouped into 2 distinct types. Bacteria and archaea make up the prokaryotes. They are very simple organisms, but because of their simplicity they have the ability to survive in extreme conditions. They were the first life forms to evolve, and for about 2 billion years they were the most complex living thing on Earth. But in some ways, their simplicity is their survival strategy. About 2 billion years ago, some bacteria of different types appear to have fused together. This produced a more complex cell that was made up of parts called organelles that were good at different jobs. Because one of these organelles was very good at obtaining energy from sugar, these cells were extremely efficient living things and were able to use energy to build more complicated bodies. Organisms with this new cell type are called the eukaryotes. Some eukaryotes, the protista, maintained a single-celled lifestyle, but they are vastly more complex than bacteria. From these single-celled organisms, however, these complex cells were able to get together and build bodies. 3 main types of multicellular organism evolved out of the protista: the plants, animals, and fungi. Each of these has a characteristic type of cell and a special type of feeding strategy. All types of cells have chromosomes. Cells carry out their functions with proteins. The blueprint for making proteins is carried in the DNA. DNA carries a blueprint for every protein the cell or organism needs to survive. DNA is so important that it is packaged very carefully into a structure called a chromosome. In bacteria, chromosomes tend to be circular. In eukaryotes, they are linear and more numerous in different organisms. In eukaryotes, the chromosomes are kept in a compartment called the nucleus to keep the DNA and its functions separate from the rest of the cell. Humans have 46 chromosomes in every cell nucleus. Before cells divide, the chromosomes make new copies of themselves with incredible accuracy in a process called replication. Each copy goes into one of the 2 new cells that form during cell division, and thus one cell becomes 2 new cells, each with an identical set of DNA molecules. Multicellular organisms pass the information from making proteins to their offspring, either by making new structures that break off and become new individuals, or by making sex cells. More on this later. The DNA of each type of organism is different, because each organism has a different way of surviving and thus needs different proteins. Organisms get better at surviving in new environments as new versions of proteins appear. Bacteria can speed up this process by passing little bits of DNA between themselves. These are mini chromosomes called plasmids that are circular. When a plasmid enters a bacterial cell, it starts making new proteins which can give the cell new abilities to survive. For example, to avoid drying out in a drought. Plasmids are only found in prokaryotes. All cells have a cell membrane. The cell membrane is a very thin structure made of molecules called phospholipids. It separates the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell so that conditions inside the cell can be optimized or made perfect for all the chemical reactions the cell needs for survival. The cell membrane can be modified by proteins so that it can control which substances enter or leave the cell. Proteins can make the cell membrane permeable to specific substances, thus giving the membrane selective permeability. Small gas molecules like oxygen and carbon dioxide can move freely through the cell membrane. This is called full permeability. Water can push its way through if there's sufficient pressure, but usually passes through protein channels embedded in the membrane. The interior of the cell is optimized for the numerous chemical reactions that occur there for survival. The watery or jelly-like solution inside the cell is called the cytoplasm. Different proteins maintain the cytoplasm at the perfect acidity and salt concentration for reactions to occur. Because eukaryotic cells use oxygen and glucose constantly for making energy, the concentration of these substances is always lower than outside the cell, and the waste product carbon dioxide is always at higher concentration than outside the cell. Remember, all cells have chromosomes, cytoplasm, and cell membranes. The mitochondrion, plural mitochondria, is found in all eukaryotic cells, plants, animals, and fungi. It is a small organelle that contains its own DNA and is filled with folded membrane similar to the cell membrane in structure. The mitochondrion is the organelle that produces enormous amounts of energy in the form of ATP from glucose using oxygen. This process is called aerobic respiration. Aerobic refers to the need for oxygen. Since 20% of the air is oxygen, most cells can obtain it easily. Without oxygen or mitochondria, the cell can only make 2 ATP from each glucose. With the mitochondrion working at full speed with oxygen, another 36 ATP can be made. This is an 18 times increase in energy production. A cell wall is a structure that increases the durability of the cell by building a protective barrier outside the cell membrane. It does not control what enters or leaves the cell, but gives the cell a sturdiness that the cell membrane cannot do. In plants, the cell wall is made of cellulose, the same material as paper, which allows plant cells to pump themselves full of water to achieve turgidity. Plants stand up by filling their cells with water. Without water they wilt, like a deflated, bouncy castle. It's easy to get the name of the cell wall mixed up with the name of the cell membrane. They are two different structures. Animal cells do not have cell walls. The vacuole is a compartment in cells for the storage of substances away from the cytoplasm. Plant cells use a large central vacuole to store water and to fill up to achieve turgidity. If they filled their cytoplasm with water, they would no longer be able to carry out chemical reactions. Vacuoles occur in other types of cells in smaller form. In plants, the chloroplast is an organelle with its own DNA that carries out photosynthesis. It has a structure of alternating piles of discs and flat membranes that aid it in its function. The chloroplast contains the green pigment chlorophyll, which gives plants their green colour. Chlorophyll captures energy from the sun. This is used by the chloroplast to make glucose. The ribosome is a very small organelle present in all cells. It is the cellular machine that constructs proteins from amino acids, which are the raw materials of proteins. It is made from RNA and has 2 binding zones. It binds to messenger RNA at one site to read the code for the next amino acid. The other site binds the required amino acids to the new protein chain. Ribosomes are found in the cytoplasm and are the site of protein synthesis.